It's the game of the year in college football, and we've got it on CBS. Top-ranked Georgia against defending champion Alabama for the SEC championship and a spot in the college football playoff. It's been an unpredictable season everywhere except in Athens, Georgia. The Bulldogs have been unflappable. After opening the season by shutting down Clemson, it's been one boat race after another. The dog defense, one of the most dominant we've seen in recent college football history. But they haven't faced an offense quite like the Bryce Young-led Crimson Tide.
He's like a point guard. He's like an elite point guard that can distribute the ball. And when he's dribbling down the court, he's got the ability to throw it over there, and then he can make you miss.
For Alabama, it's been about survival. A surprising loss to A&M and several more close calls, and many are thinking there's a definite gap between the top two teams in the SEC. But it's hard to ever bet against the greatest coach of all time.
It'll be a tremendous challenge for our players to play well. We've got to have the right mindset and good preparation all week long to be able to do that.
Motivation isn't short on either side, especially for Georgia. They haven't beaten Alabama since 2007, and they haven't won a national championship since 1980. And it was BAMA who kept them from snapping that title drought 4 years ago. The Tide coming back from 13 down at halftime to force overtime and then walk off with the national championship. That following season, very similar circumstances in the SEC championship. Georgia again held a 2-touchdown lead, only to see the Tide rally for the win. Is this the year Georgia finally gets over the hump? Can Saban and Alabama make it 7 straight against the Dogs? Everything on the line Saturday afternoon in Atlanta.
Thank you, Chris Hassel and the team. Got my blood pumping with that hype video, and you don't even need all of that well-produced greatness to not get excited about what we have. Josh Pate, Barrett Sallee joining us from the College Football Hall of Fame in Atlanta. Let's take a moment to dive inside the storylines surrounding the SEC championship game. And Josh, I'll start with you. As you look at the Heisman Trophy conversation and Alabama quarterback Bryce Young, do you have in mind any set of circumstances or any specific results that need to happen in order to greatly impact his Heisman Trophy chances?
I'm looking all around. Like Barrett and I are surrounded by trophies right now. We probably have
There's one over there. We can go grab one if you want.
There's a Heisman around here somewhere. So we put in the request. Look, I'm thinking about it like this. I'm on the Will Anderson committee, so it's unfair to ask me this question. But since we're going with an alternate guy in Crimson, I would like to know, because I don't have an answer for you. I don't know what that minimum baseline statistically is. I don't know if it just means he has to win, even if he throws for like 96 yards in the process. But what I want to know is, let's say he doesn't meet that minimum baseline. I want to know who, or whomst, as I choose to say, is standing in line in the backup position. Like, who's the second place guy here? Because we got a lot of names that I've seen on these lists who aren't even playing tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like C.J. Stroud might sneak his way back into it. But I think the interesting thing is that Kenny Pickett has been great all year long, right? Nobody's going to watch the ACC championship game. Like, nobody's going to watch it. So while Kenny Pickett actually in reality might deserve it, nobody's going to see him play. And there are a lot of voters who don't necessarily pay attention to college football 24/7. And some of them aren't even in sports anymore. They're working for PR firms and still have a vote. So I know that Josh is the head of the Will Anderson committee. I am more aboard the Jordan Davis train. I think especially against this Alabama offensive line, he's one of those guys that if he has that kind of game, that kind of closing argument, then I think he has a chance against, basically a field that, I don't know, it's kind of lackluster.
At the very least, Chip, I think we can all agree. Well, I'll agree. I don't know if you all agree. It's refreshing to at least hear some maybe defensive juice out way on the perimeter of the conversation, but at least we hear it this year.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation because, I mean, some of us here, we're Heisman voters, and obviously there are always snipers trained on us at all times, so we can't say who we're going to vote for. That's really not a problem because I have no idea who I'm going to vote for at this point. I've been kind of pulling down my list all week to a couple of candidates, and yes, some of them are playing in that SEC title game. One of them is Kenny Pickett playing in the ACC title game. But I really don't know who it is yet because this has been an interesting situation, and whether it's an offensive or defensive player, nobody has pulled away from the pack, and Bryce Young has a chance upset on Saturday in what is going to be the biggest game of the weekend, in the game with the most playoff implications. And if he's able to do what no other quarterback in the country has been able to do this season, throw out for over 300 yards and a bunch of touchdowns and lead Alabama to a win over this Georgia defense, I think that's probably going to be enough to get him over the hump. He's currently the favorite at most sports books. I think that things are kind of turning that way, but if he has a bad game and Alabama loses, this thing's up for grabs. I have no idea who's going to win.
Yeah, I kind of think win is the big factor here for Bryce Young. And as we're about to get to, winning is going to be something that's going to be incredibly difficult. Having success against this Georgia defense is going to be something that's incredibly difficult. Bryce Young has some of the tools, but this Georgia defense is just built absolutely different. So as we start to look at the different ways that Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning are going to use this hyper-talented defense and really try to limit all of that playmaking ability that Kirby Smart described, that point guard type approach that you've got with Bryce Young. Barrett, I'll let you take first stab at this. What do you think are going to be some of the keys, or what are some of your expectations for a Georgia defense that, obviously a lead up front? If you maybe want to look at a spot where you might have an edge against them, maybe it's in the secondary, but how often has that even mattered against the schedule that Georgia has played? What are your expectations from the Bulldogs on defense?
Yeah, I think they have to get pressure up the middle. That's always a quarterback's worst nightmare. And we saw Bryce Young, while we have seen him at times this year throw well on the move, last week against Auburn, and granted it was under the most pressure he's faced all year long, but he wasn't that great until the end of the game. So I think pressure up the middle. But honestly, if I'm Alabama and I look at that Georgia defense knowing the offensive line is so bad, go 5 wide. Go Mike Leach air raid. Just take the pass rush out of it and just try to let your playmakers make some plays in space, because the last thing you want to do is to have Bryce Young under pressure make one mistake, because when you make a mistake against Georgia, bam, you're down 14 points.
It's really interesting because, Barrett, you'll remember this. Tom and Chip, you'll remember this. I don't think a lot of people will, though. When we were leading up to the season and the transfer portal was sorting itself out, we had 2 big pickups. It was Eric Gilbert, obviously, that goes to Georgia, and he hasn't been a factor for different reasons this year. But Tyke Smith also goes to Georgia. And the talk at the time was, wow, this is really going to help them out, because especially when you get to that flex star dime position, they are in such dire need there. Well, Tyke Smith is not with this team because he's been out. It's just not mattered so far for Georgia. And so you started to hear, as the week's gone on, some people start to talk. As you try and nitpick and find a way that Alabama can attack Georgia, you start to hear people say, what about that Bulldog dime defense? What do we know about that dime defense? And we don't know a nickel's worth of anything. Write that down. A nickel's worth of anything about that dime defense. They haven't really had to be on the field, and they've gotten pressure on everyone. So you've got like 2 nanoseconds to throw the ball. To me, when you look at the right side of Alabama's offensive line, there's a big difference in a liability and just a terminal flaw. If it can, this is so sad, if it can merely be a big liability for Alabama tomorrow, they have won one small battle.
Massive step forward.
If it's a terminal flaw, though, that's when those under tickets start to cash really, really quickly.
Yeah, I'm worried about this Alabama offensive line going against this Georgia defense, too. And Barrett, I think you've got a good idea there with the idea of going 5 wide and just running a lot of quick game in the passing game to get the ball out of there as quick as possible, because this is an Alabama offensive line that has struggled all season long. It struggled against Florida. It struggled in the loss to Texas A&M. It had problems with Arkansas, LSU, and Auburn last week. And as you mentioned, Barrett, Bryce Young was really under a lot of pressure last week against an Auburn defense that's good, but is nowhere near the level of this Georgia defense that they will be facing on Saturday. Texas A&M's front 7 was the best one that Alabama had faced all season long until tomorrow, and we saw how that game ended up for the Tide. And I think going into this one, this is a Georgia defense that, yeah, there are some question marks. We don't know if this secondary can withstand Alabama's passing attack because it hasn't faced one like this to this point. But at the same time, it's because it hasn't mattered, because that front 7 doesn't give the receivers enough time to get open and expose any possible flaws in that back 4, 5, 6, whatever it's going to be. And I think that's going to be the case again on Saturday. I really worry about the Alabama offense, which is why I think if Bryce Young is able to do what he needs to do to win this game, he's going to win the Heisman, because he'll be the first one to have conquered what nobody else has been able to at this point.
Okay, time for picks. And I apologize to put everyone on the spot, but I feel like we talk about this game, and we have talked about this game so many times. I want to add some spice here now that we're live. So I want to know your pick, but also an approximate game score. Give me the feel or the script of what your expectations are going to be. Of course, as we know, Georgia -6.5, over under of 49.5. Josh, I'll let you go first.
So I made this thing an 8.5-point line, so I'm not quite, dogs by 90, but I'm looking somewhere in like the 27-17, 27-19 something range. You can tell I never guess scores. What I wonder is, like, first off, what is that magic number for Georgia? What is the magic number for the favorite here? The second thing, and then I will toss to you because all we need is a score prediction here, Barrett, is there was a stat that was thrown at me last night. Haven't heard it. I thought I'd heard every stat all week. Have not heard this stat. Talk about explosivity and passing efficiency and whatnot. Stetson Bennett, and this is alleged, so don't hold me to this, but allegedly Stetson Bennett against ranked teams, which would be for them Clemson, Kentucky, and Arkansas, not a single pass over 30 yards. Now, here's the devil's advocate. He doesn't even have to walk on camera. I'll tell you what the devil's advocate is saying. Well, yeah, but he hasn't had to. Yep. There's a whole bunch of yeah, but he hadn't had to, or yeah, but they haven't had to for Georgia. And so was my mentality. I tried to find a way for Bama, and there are a couple of ways. But if I'm going to be proven wrong this late in the year, I'm going to be proven wrong by Bama doing something they haven't shown the ability to do, rather than being proven wrong by Georgia just doing what they've done all year. So that's how I arrived at my very, very fluid prediction there.
I'm going to take Georgia as well. I'll grab the point or lay the points. I think it's going to be like 30-17. I think it's going to be old school to begin with, but I think you've seen Georgia. We saw it against Florida. When they see a little opening, they just go right through it. And you mentioned something that I think is really interesting, Josh. You said that Georgia hasn't had to do things that they're uncomfortable with, especially with Stetson Bennett. But the thing about that, there's a lot to suggest that they can. He's second in the nation in yards per attempt. So, yeah, they've been doing that only when they want to, which is fine. But it suggests that they can do it when they have to. There's nothing to suggest they can't do that, especially considering they get George Pickens back, we assume, at full health. And we saw him last week get one catch. But to me, I just think right now Georgia is so much more complete, and it's a bad matchup for Georgia. And I do think, though, the under will hit because Kirby will recognize that this Alabama team, and more specifically this Georgia team, is not like those other two that played in Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Yep. This team can sit on a ball. They can deflate the football in the second half, not try to do anything. We saw it against Clemson in the opener where the second half they could have just kneeled on it 3 times and punted like Red Bow U and the Water Boy, and it'd have been fine. And I think it'll be like that again against Alabama because he's not threatened by them.
Chip, if you want tension tenfold, like you've rarely seen it play out on a national stage, have Stetson Bennett forced to throw the ball out of necessity rather than luxury in the first half, and maybe it not quite click, and we go into halftime having known the history of this game and halftime adjustments at quarterback, and we all know there's this cat named JT Daniels. He's just sitting over there. He's warm. He's ready to go. He's cleared. If you want tension, have that play out. If you're a sadist and you have no rooting interest and you just want to see drama, pull for some early incomplete passes on obvious passing downs for Georgia.
JT comes off the bench like Jonathan Moxon in Varsity Blues and saves the day.
I think if JT Daniels plays in this game, it's going to be because the game's already over in the fourth quarter and they're saving Stetson Bennett for the playoff. I'm taking Georgia -6.5. I'll guess a final score of about 31-17. Could be bigger. I just think that if you look at this, Alabama hasn't been able to run the ball offensively all season long, and I have no reason to believe they're going to be able to figure that out against this Georgia defense. So if I'm the Bulldogs and I only have to worry about one dimension of Alabama's offense, good luck. I have a hard time believing the Crimson Tide are going to be able to put together long drives and sustained scoring drives in this game, just like everybody else has struggled to do against this Georgia defense. And I think the Bulldogs will be in control. It might not be a blowout, but I don't think you're ever going to be in a situation where you think Georgia's in serious danger of losing the game. And I do think in the second half, it's probably going to be, let's just take the air out of the ball and keep this Alabama offense off the field and move on to the college football playoff.
Gentlemen, everything you say is so sensible. And every time I run the Chipalytics, I do get a similar result. This is a game where Alabama's not going to be able to score enough points to win. But I'm catching points with the GOAT. Are you kidding me? Give me Alabama 24, Georgia 23. A soul-shattering Alabama win that sends the Crimson Tide to #1 in the college football playoff rankings on Sunday. 2 SEC teams in the playoff. And I look, all of the numbers all sensible angles say Georgia wins this. But something happened when Bryce Young led that 97-yard drive. I don't know, man. If he takes that mojo on into Atlanta, things could pucker up and get very, very interesting. Like, Josh, to me, that is the tension and drama. The tension and drama is what happens for Georgia if it starts to get shaky. If you've got that lead again in the third quarter and Bryce Young starts to score, like, what is your response there? Like, the sensible pick is Georgia. If you're going to wager your hard-earned dollars, but in this economy of takes, sounds like they're counting out the GOAT. Like, I got the GOAT catching points. I'm going to go.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Do you remember back in 92 or whatever it was when Alabama beat Miami for the national title? There was this one AP voter out in, I believe, Arizona, who just stuck to his guns, and he voted Bama number 1. Wire to wire voted Bama number 1. And I'm pretty sure they built a statue of that guy right alongside Bryant in Tuscaloosa. I don't know if this ascends you to that lofty stature in Tuscaloosa, but I will tell you, well, at least I've heard, there's been a memo sent out to everyone in our industry that you're not allowed to do what you just did this week, and yet you did it anyway. So I respect you for ripping up the memo right here in front of God and everyone, and for your sake, if this works out, I'm just going to be happy to say I know you.
Hey, you're just a homer for Team Chaos, and we all love Team Chaos.
Listen, I got to look out for my guy, Nick. You know, it's the GOAT catching points. You're disrespecting the GOAT. Somebody's got to stand up for Nick Saban. Our thanks to Josh Pate and Barrett Salee.
That pesky Nick Saban, that pesky underdog.
On the scene all throughout the SEC Championship game coverage here on CBS Sports HQ. And, of course, you can watch The Late Kick with Josh Pate live Sundays, Tuesdays, Thursdays at 8 Eastern on YouTube and Facebook Live. And download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts.
Do you want a sports network that delivers everything that matters about the game? The highlights, the picks, the instant analysis, no yelling, no fake debates, no politics. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a moment.